We are in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I am very pleased to have for my guest with the Hamilton College Jazz Archive my good friend Wendell Brunious, straight from New Orleans, via many different places you've been telling me.
Oh boy, I've traveled so much. It's
Yeah.
been very, very tough, but you just take something good out of it and just keep going.
Yeah. How's the Preservation Hall thing going?
Well, that's going very, very well. That's it's a nice thing to be part of, just carrying on a musical tradition that's very much worth carrying on. Even though I like a lot of other forms of music, it's the people who can carry that music on should take some responsibility of doing so.
What's the average age in that group now, besides yourself?
Yeah, well, it used to be, average age used to be about 75 in that band, but now it's, I would think it's around 45 now.
No kidding.
45 to 50.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any of the kind of original fellas left?
Well, there's just, there are a few original people, but not active anymore. The last person was Mr. Narvin Kimball, the banjo player, left-handed banjo player, and he had a stroke a couple of months ago, so he's inactive now. But hopefully, maybe he'll come back and just sing a few songs with us.
Yeah.
And just stay active that way. That would be really, really nice to have him back. But he's 91 years old now, so it's you know, you have a stroke when you're 91. That's tough.
Yeah. What's New Orleans like as a jazz center now? Is it at all?
Well, there's a lot of stuff going on there. One of the main things I don't like about the New Orleans thing is they're not really like progressing musically. They're playing their little kind of B-flat licks, you know, but they're not really progressing like for playing changes, playing different keys and stuff like that. We don't have enough kids trying to do that. We have the kids in the colleges who aren't the street smart type of musicians, so they're getting the education, but they can't play the street music. But then we have the street guys who don't go to school, so they're not really playing the, you know, like a real educated, higher form of music.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'd like to see more people like in the middle between these two things than, you know, separated so far.
Your family is musical, I know. And does it go back a ways?
Oh, yeah. Well, it goes back. Actually, my Uncle Willie Santiago was one of the first guitar players of jazz, worked with like Buddy Bolden and, you know, like Bunk Johnson and people way, way back. Because my mother's family, her father's family was from Santiago, Chile. And they had come to New Orleans to perform and decided to stay there. I guess it was a heck of a trek to get to New Orleans from Chile in this was about 1873 or something like that. I mean, so then after the gig is over, you got to go back. I don't know how long it took to get there, but my goodness,
no, wait a minute.
No
You
one
come
was
to New
inspired.
Orleans to just play?
To do a show or something like that. And they were, you know, classical musicians mostly. I mean, there was no jazz then. So everybody read and, you know, just played by the paper. And, you know, like they got to New Orleans and it was like some ragtime going on there and kind of funky butt music, you know. So they were my mother's family was really instrumental in forming jazz that way.
Wow.
Yeah.
How much documentation do you have on
Not
that kind
much.
of thing? Anything?
It's hard to even comment on stuff like that because it's so difficult to find information on that. So, but we have people rewriting history every day all of a sudden now, you know. They're taking things that they can't really prove, that's kind of rumors and stuff like that, and documenting it as the truth, and that's a little bit scary. So it's hard to, you know, this is what like my old Uncle Willie had told, you know, like my mother and them when they were kids, how they got to New Orleans. So, but it's not documented. So this is the first time I'm ever saying that.
Yeah.
Because I can't really prove it.
And they had no idea that they were perhaps part of making some musical history. They were just working.
Yeah, they were just working and creating and doing what they felt comfortable doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great though, man.
Wow.
Yeah.
In the Brunious family of musicians,
Yeah.
is that any relation to your last name?
Yes.
That's the
Like George
same
Brunious,
thing?
Mary Brunious,
Okay.
and Abby Brunious, and those guys.
Right.
They were kin to my grandfather, but coming from like a Creole family, and things were so divided. You know, whoever could, we had what we call Passe Blanc Creoles, which means we're white Creoles, and
Uh-huh.
there was so much opportunity on that side, man. I mean, you can't blame people for just, you know, like I always say, if you have caviar here, and you got, you know, dog food here, which one do you go for, man? You know, so again, people who could go for caviar went for it,
Mm-hmm.
and some of them got away with it, and
I see.
great. So I mean, you can't really blame anybody for
Mhm.
trying to better their own
Right.
condition.
What is the name Brunies?
Brunious, yeah. Well,
Bru-
when our family came from a city in southern France called Pau, and our original name, Brunois, Brunoix.
Oh.
So then that got to be Brunois. But then it got kind of Americanized, Brunios, Brunios. And then there were different forms of spellings after that,
Mm-hmm.
so that people could pull their magic act, let's call it.
I see.
So it's just,
Okay.
you know, those things just go like that.
Wow.
And sometimes it's really tough to talk about, because you got people who say, oh no, that didn't go like that, because they want to, yeah, everyone will believe whatever they want to believe, and it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to most of the time avoid
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Wow. Well, I really don't know a heck of a lot about how you got into this music, and I'd really enjoy finding out.
Yeah,
I know your
well-
father was quite musical and a
Yeah, my
heck of a
dad-
writer.
My dad was a great trumpet player. His daddy played piano, which was George Brunious and his cousin. And John, his name was John Brunious, also my grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
He played kind of like piano, and when my dad was about in second grade, Willie Humphrey, you know of him, the clarinet player,
Mhm.
Willie Humphrey, he was teaching at Craig School, Joseph A. Craig, and that's where my dad was going to school. So Willie talked to my grandfather about getting my dad an instrument. He said, man, you know, that kid's got some talent somewhere, man. You should get him an instrument. So they bought him a trumpet, and he really progressed on trumpet. So, you know, like till when he had gotten skipped 2 grades, so he graduated from high school when he was 15,
Hmm.
and he went up to New York with my cousin Harold Dejan. You know of him?
No.
Who has the Olympia Brass Band?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was my dad's first cousin. And he went up there and he auditioned for Juilliard, and he won a scholarship to Juilliard. So when he was 16, he was at Juilliard, and by the time he was 19, I don't know if he had graduated or if he had left. I don't know what the thing was, but my mom's mother had died, so he came back to New Orleans. They got married, and he started touring with the I think it was the J. McShane band at first, and he wrote some arrangements. Charlie Parker and it was
Yeah.
in the band, and a few guys. Then he went with the Cab Calloway band when Dizzy Gillespie did the whole Spitball trip.
Oh, your father was on that
Cab
band?
hired my daddy when he got rid of Dizzy
Oh,
Gillespie.
gee, I didn't know
And
that.
I used to say that to Diz sometimes, and Diz would say, man, I went on to be famous. I'm glad Pickett took that job. Just imagine.
Oh, that's
And then
interesting.
he worked and wrote for Billy Eckstine.
Uh-huh.
And when he was 28 years old, he was ranked the 6th trumpet player in the downbeat poll.
Uh-huh.
And he got arthritis in his legs, and he couldn't walk for 2 years.
Oh, my.
And I mean, if you have 3 kids at home and you can't walk for 2 years, and you know, I mean,
Mhm.
writing arrangements, I don't know what arrangements paid back in the 40s sometime, but it just, you know, like decimated his whole economic situation. So he never really got back from that. He
Uh-huh.
just, you know, he did pretty well, but he never got to that status. I mean, he died of a broken heart. He just always wanted to get back there.
Wow.
but he just it just never worked for him.
Mm-hmm.
Having kids, responsibilities, and
Yeah.
you know.
Did he continue to play in New Orleans some?
Yeah, he played a lot with like Paul Barberin.
Uh-huh.
My uncle Lester Santiago played piano in the band. And when my dad first came back, my uncle was like, "Man, you better learn to play some of this music," because my dad wasn't playing traditional music at all. So he and my uncle Lester used to, you know, practice together. They lived on Villeray Street in the Treme. That's where my uncle used to live. And my dad said that he would go over there just about every day. They'd go over a few songs, and that's how he met my mom, practicing with my uncle.
Uh-huh.
And you know, it's kind of nice to know those things like that.
Yeah.
But I kind of, you know, grew up listening to my older brother play trumpet. Boy, he was a killer trumpet player. Art Blakey wanted to hire him in his band, but I don't know exactly what happened, but he didn't go. I was like, man, this is what you've been practicing for your whole life. John would have been a major star on trumpet. That guy could really play, man. I mean, he was like, he had like all that Clifford Brown stuff, but with the Miles cool thing, and all the chops, you know, because he used to practice like all the Maynard Ferguson records, so he could hit all those high notes. This guy was incredible. And, I mean, when he was a kid, you know, my dad was young then, so he was really, really, like, on him to practice a lot. When he was 15, this guy played Flight of the Bumblebee for his recital. I mean, this is, you know, this is really great stuff that this guy could do. But I grew up listening to him, and he had a lot of Dizzy Gillespie records, and, you know, Clifford Brown, quite naturally, Miles. And, I mean, I always heard traditional music, and I played with Olympia. I used to go and sit in with them when I was a kid, from 14 until I was about 17. And plus I played in rock bands. I used to try to imitate like Lou Soloff solos on, you know, Go Down Gambling and all that, you know.
And he was here this weekend.
Yeah, it was very nice to see him, man. I told him all about that. It was, he was like, me? Yeah, you.
Yeah.
But when in 1976, Albert Papa French, who took over the band from Papa Celestine, which was like the oldest established band in the world, continuing like from 1910. He called my dad to make a job, and my dad was like, "Well, Albert, I'm sick, man, but I'll send my son." So he was like, "Oh yeah, okay, man." Well, Papa French thought he was going to send John, my older brother, you know. And I walked in there. At that time, I had my big Jimi Hendrix Close Santana hairdo, you know. I was, oh boy, I thought I was so hot, man. And I went there, and Papa looked at me and says, "Who are you, man?" I said, "Well, I'm Pickett's son, man." And he says, "Oh, we thought he was going to send John, man." Well, my whole ego just took a nosedive, you know. He said, "But I tell you what, you know some songs?" I said, "Well, yeah, I know a few songs. I've been practicing a little bit." So he says, "Well, look, I'm going to make you my band leader. Whatever you call tonight, that's what we're going to play." And man, what a relief that was.
Wow.
And I learned a lot that night just about being a band leader. Because if you take the weakest link and make that your stronger link, you won't have any problems, because you can always cut back. You can't always get this guy to go, you know, ahead. So that's what we did. And man, I did very well on that first night. You know, I knew a few songs, and you know, he did a few things that he sang, and just I got to play. I could play for him. I just didn't know a whole lot of melodies.
Yeah.
So that was a really great learning experience.
Wow.
Yeah.
What kind of tunes did you call at that time?
Well, quite naturally, we did Millenberg Joys. That's the first song we did. I kind of knew it. I didn't really know the melody, but it was kind of like Bourbon Street Forum, so I could follow it. And I had an old record with Kit Howard where he did like, I Wish I Could See Me Like My Sister Kate, and Sugar Blues, What Can I Say Dear After I Say I'm Sorry, what else was on that? On the Coconut Island, and a few songs like this. It was you know, wide array of songs. And Papa was like, yeah, man, you're doing good, man. And, you know, I knew a few hymns, you know, Closer Walk with Thee and By,
Yeah.
from playing with the brass bands. So I did actually pretty well. And he sang a couple of tunes, Embraceable You and stuff, you know, which I kind of knew of. I couldn't really play that kind of stuff then. But it was, I just kind of did my best. And I got paid. That was important.
All right. Man. At that point, how old were you? 1976?
I was about 21.
Okay. Had you decided on a musical career?
Well, I was still in business school. My dad sent me to business school. He said, man, I think he was under the impression I was going to get a real job one day, you know? And so I was still in college, actually. And I wanted to play music, but I was just thinking I have to be serious about business if I'm going to get a degree in it. You know, knowing in the back of my mind, I don't want to do this, man. I want to play trumpet. But so I had kind of made up my mind, but I was still had to focus on getting my business degree, because that's what my dad said I was supposed to do, and that was it. So you know, but it seems to have worked out pretty well.
What was the entrance into the music field that kind of cemented your, okay, I'm going to do this? Or was there one?
Well, when I was about, just before I started playing with Papa French, I was about 19, and I went on Bourbon Street, and I heard some of those guys play, and I wasn't really impressed. So I was thinking, I could actually play as well as this guy, you know, with a little time under my belt. So that was very inspiring, that this guy had a job and I could actually do that.
Wow.
So then I knew I could do it. I was a business major, majoring in distributive education, DE. And in DE, you had to have a job, because it's like a management course. So I had a little job at Sears. So I was going to school full time. I was working at Sears, plus playing a few little rock gigs here or there. And this guy used to come in and buy fishing equipment. I had no idea who he was. And then one day, Herlin Raleigh, you know him?
Yes.
You know him, the drummer?
Yeah.
He and I grew up like brothers. I mean, I was the best man in his wedding. And he came in Sears one day and he says, "Man, what are you doing working here, man?" I said, "Well, you know, it's part of my college course and I have to do it." He says, "Look, I'm working a job on Bourbon Street as a trumpet player, but I want the job as a drummer." He said, "Why don't you come take this job as a trumpet player?" And I was like, "You play drums?" I didn't even know he played drums then. He was like, "Yeah." I said, "Oh, come on, man." He said, "I'm telling you, man, I play drums." So I said, "Okay." So when I went to the audition that night, the guy who was the band leader was this guy who used to come buy the fishing equipment from me. And he was like, "You work at Sears?" I said, "Yeah." He says, I said, well, yeah. It was such a coincidence. Well, it wound up, I got that job. It was at the 500 Club, playing for a striptease show.
All right.
And this guy, his name was Vladimir Vasiliev, and he had gone to Berkeley in Boston and studied with Margaret Sholoff. Come to find out, Lou Soloff was his first trumpet player when Lou was about 19 or 20 years old. And I was telling Lou this story, and he was like, "My God, man, you just," I had forgotten about Vladimir.
Wow.
But that kind of, then, you know, I kind of started making a little money, and then it was like, hey, I could actually make a living doing this. So Vladimir had a great Latin band, which he had like Al McKibben and, you know, Don Elias and Bobby Rodriguez, and all these guys were in his band, Manny Duran. And so we formed a Latin band in New Orleans. The Aquarians was the name of the band, Vladimir and the Aquarians. And it, you know, then we started growing. He had some beautiful charts that he had written with all kinds, just to play those phrases, man. It was you know, preparing me for futuristic. I didn't realize it then. It was just, I was just doing it. I was just making a job.
Yeah.
But that was great preparation. Then, and like I got the call from Papa French, and I just kind of played some gigs. In 1979, I played on the New Orleans Jazz Fest with Lionel Hampton. Wallace Davenport was in the band, so he called me and said, "Hey, man, can you read?" I can spell a little bit. So he was like, "Well, look, Lionel Hampton needs a trumpet player for tonight, man. You want to make the job?" So I said, "Yeah." So we had a rehearsal that afternoon, and I made the job. And about 3 months later, Lionel Hampton called Wallace and said, "Hey, who's that boy that you had down there, you know?" So Bill Titone called me, and Wallace says, "Man, look, whatever kind of money they offer you, take it. That's an experience that you can't buy. Just take the job, man." He says, you know, just take the job. It's, in the future, you're not going to even think about it, but it'll help you so much." So I did about 5 months of staying in the YMCA in New York.
No kidding.
Oh my goodness! And we used to travel a lot.
Because Lionel didn't pay like a heck of a lot.
Well, he paid weekly.
Oh.
Very weekly. But it was okay. You know, there were some great guys in the band. Curtis Fuller was in the band. Ricky Ford. Frankie Dunlop played drums. Man. Zeke Mullins. Sometimes we had Teddy Wilson on piano.
Right. Yeah.
And George Wein sometimes on the piano. And Yoshio Maruda, you know of him, the alto player?
No, I haven't heard of him.
But sometimes we'd have a guest spot with Illinois Jacquette or Lockjaw Davis on a cob, man. Sometimes all three of those guys would be there, man. And they'd play Lady Be Good. Gee, I never forget it. But boy, I used to look forward, because that was about 20 minutes. But man, did those guys do some head cutting.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Whew, my
Tough
goodness.
Texas tenors.
Yeah. Those guys, boy, I would look so forward to it. But just wait for Gates to say, hey boy, Lady Be Good. Oh man, I would get so excited.
You believe he's still at it, you know?
Yeah, and he would practice, because where I stayed was at 63rd Broadway, and he stayed on 64th and Broadway, Lincoln Center, Lincoln Plaza. And I used to go up to his house every day, and he would go through some stuff, man. And he was an old man then. He was about 76 or something, 75 or 76. And he was still practicing 4 to 5 hours a day. And one time we went to Detroit at the Pontchartrain Hotel. And man, Gates called Giant Steps. And Baggs had come up there with his vibes. First they did this I've Got Rhythm thing. I think it was Hampton Decks, we used to call it. And Eric Dickerson had, not Eric Dickerson, what was the tenor player, Dickerson?
Eric Dixon.
Eric Dixon, yeah. I'm thinking Eric Dickerson, the football player.
Right.
Eric Dixon had done an arrangement that Dexter Gordon and Hampton had done on that. And boy, I think it was Gates stepped in. It was I've Got Rhythm, Gates stepped in.
Oh, okay.
And they did that first. And Baggs played really well, but boy, then Lionel Hampton really wanted blood. Then, man, he said, get out that Giant Steps, boys. Boy, Gates started playing that minor third perfect fourth, man. Oh, my goodness. And Baggs was like, you know, I mean, Baggs is a great bluesy player, but he didn't play those kinds of changes. Man, Gates just
no kidding.
Oh, man. Boy, it was so exciting, though. I mean, when, you know, we'd have a ride from New Haven to, I don't know, Chicago or somewhere like that. As soon as you get out the bus, Gates would fly, you know. you were on the bus 15 hours. And he'd say, you know, it's time for a rehearsal. So, I mean, you'd get out there dog-tired, red-eyed, and, you know, 15 guys on a bus with one urinal, you know. Just
funky butt.
Yeah. But it was all part of it.
Yeah.
And that was a great experience, though, man. Wallace Davenport was right. He was right. He said, man, just no matter what kind of money they offer you, just take it. So Yeah, that was a great, great opportunity and preparation.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of started like substituting,
Yeah.
for different people. I did a lot of European trips, and Chet Baker and I had the same manager, Wim Vicht, from Wageningen, Holland.
Uh-huh.
So he had booked me some nice gigs over there. Some traditional gigs, some kind of swing gigs and bop gigs and stuff like that. So, then I kind of started traveling with the Preservation Hall band, like really about 1987.
Mm-hmm.
I had done a few trips with them before that, but it's when the old guy Percy Humphrey really started getting old. I started doing more and more touring with them.
Yeah.
But it's just, I still enjoy getting out on my own. I mean, that's the kind of house buying job, which we all need. Thank God they're there sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes you want a little more freedom of expression, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Right.
Yeah.
Have you ever led your own group for any length of time?
Yeah. I mean, I still have a band that I tour with now. I just call it Wendell Brunious
Oh.
New Orleans All Stars.
Uh-huh.
I mean, we've toured all through Germany, and I had a beautiful 2 weeks in Korea that I brought my band on, and we did a CD from that, and it was really, really great. I mean, really great. Freddie Alonso tours with me, and
Mm-hmm.
he's a really great trombone player. I had Charlie Gabriel, who's from New Orleans, but he lives in Detroit now. He left New Orleans with the Fast Navarro Kids Band, like way back, 47 or something like that. And he's a great player and great guy. And I have Thaddeus Richard, he used to be the saxophone player with Paul McCartney and Wings.
Oh my.
Yeah, and he's a great piano player.
Uh-huh.
His daddy wrote a lot of stuff for Ray Charles Reynolds Richard. He wrote I've Got a Woman and a few
Mm-hmm.
things like that. I wish I was getting that royalty check. But, and Mark Brooks is my bass player. Sometimes I use Shannon Powell, who's a really great drummer from New Orleans. He was Harry Connick Jr.'s drummer with the big band. And he didn't go back when Harry, redid his thing.
Mm-hmm.
But he tours with me sometimes, or sometimes Gerald French. And we just try to make the best music we know how to make.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the music that this particular group plays? How do you describe it to potential markets?
Yeah, to potential markets. I would just, I don't know, high quality music, I could call it. We do a lot of standards, and I try to keep that New Orleans feeling happening in some things, because that's a pretty unique thing. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Most people from Dover, Delaware, or somewhere like that are not going to know anything about a New Orleans groove.
Yeah.
They may, those guys may could play some like facsimile of bebop, but to get that kind of New Orleans groove, I mean, that's a pretty unique thing throughout the world, actually.
Can you put it into words?
Well, just a two feel
Uh-huh.
with a really kind of gospel type of beat. This is kind of like the kind of triangle I try to play within. I don't know if you could hear the whole thing, but I can try to go. So the whole New Orleans concept is within that, because if you think like, oh, when the saints go marching in, right? And okay, like even Fats Domino, like, all right, I'm walking, yes, baby, I'm talking. You see, so it's all based within that. That whole New Orleans concept is based within that, and so, we try to keep that element quite naturally, even though we don't play that all night. But I love playing standards, ballads, and just grooving, because boy, we've got so much music that comes from the brain anymore in the world, that sometimes the groove is not exactly there. It's just
too much brain
too
and
much
not
brain
enough.
and not enough heart.
Uh-huh.
So I still, I try to keep the heart in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you get all of these real complex forms and stuff like that, the brain will creep in there, you know? The brain will. So that's why I like to keep it a little more simple and very melodic. Because, I mean, I'm liable to go on the job and play anything from Careless Love to, you know, Moment's Notice. But it would still be with a kind of groove that I respect and like.
Neat. The music business these days, there must be highs and lows throughout the year for you.
Yep. So thank God I have a business degree.
Yeah.
And you just learn to manage your money and manage yourself and
so there
conduct
was
yourself.
some use in
there,
that thing
right?
there.
Just conduct yourself in a nice manner.
Wow.
But I've gotten to play with some of the greatest, man. I mean, that CD we did together, you had some of the greatest people on there. Bill Waters, Jerome Richardson, Keita Betts, yourself.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, we had a really,
Yeah.
really great time doing that. You did some really fantastic
Well, I wanted to ask
music.
you about a little thing here
Okay.
that you played, and let's see if I can kind of capture that. That's beautiful. Beautiful soul, man. You like it?
Yeah.
You like it? Because you should.
That feels good. That's
Yeah.
that's what music is supposed to feel like.
Here's
That's a Clifford
Now,
Brown lick.
okay.
That's where I got
That's
that
a Clifford Brown?
Clifford Brown.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Bo-be-da-ba-do-be-da-ba.
it's like coming down a major third and then 2 half steps, then up a major third, back down to the major
Okay.
third, 2 half steps. So it's based on the whole tone.
Hmm.
And Clifford Brown used to wear that thing out. He just did it so fast and so clearly.
Yeah.
Then he'd do it backwards, you know. So I mean, I did it coming down, but he'd he'd do it going up, down, sideways. He could just do anything on the instrument. Yeah.
Well, this music hadn't been something we've been able to work on a long time, so can you see that coming when you're reading the changes? Can you see a place where that lick's going to work, kind of, or is it not so well thought out as that?
No, I don't think I'm that smart. I couldn't think that
Well,
far ahead.
I didn't say that was smart. Okay.
No, but it's just everything was grooving so well. Dennis was just playing such a laid-back groove. I was just watching him when we were playing. He just was so satisfied with everything that was going on. That's very inspirational and gives you confidence, like that I could actually play on this without playing the triad of what I'm looking at here. You know.
Yeah.
So I was looking at the changes and listening maybe even more so.
Okay.
So I was just responding to what was the pianist?
Rick.
Rick, yeah.
Yeah.
That what Rick was doing, and sometimes he'd play like an inflection of a flatted something, and then it would make you,
Yeah.
it was like
Right.
I hope this works, But that spontaneity, it kept it fresh. That's why this sounds so fresh.
Well, it was a good experience.
It really
I say,
was.
you know,
And sitting next to
Wendell.
Bill Waters,
Yeah.
man.
Well,
is
I don't know if
so-
I got this spot here.
Oh my
But-
God.
There's a spot that sounds like you guys practiced it.
Really?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I think it's coming up here when you make the transition from you to him.
Yeah.
I mean, it's seamless.
Yeah, it was pretty
You know?
seamless. I think it's just watch us. He just can hear, man.
Yeah, he can hear.
That
like
guy
crazy.
can, and man, can he play some sassy trombone? Boy, that was such a great
Yeah,
experience.
well,
Because Jerome was just, years and years ago, he recorded a record before CDs, an album with Gino Vanelli, where he played soprano.
with
And
Gino Vanelli. Get out, no
it
kidding.
was father and son.
Oh, he's
and
on that?
That's Jerome playing that.
I'll be
It,
darned.
I mean, he was like playing some of the most incredible soprano I ever heard.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my dad and I used to sit down. My dad died in '76,
Uh-huh.
so they must have recorded that around '74, '75.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, we used to sit around and listen to that. And you know, my dad being like a real staunch big band swing type of guy, you know, he was like, hey man, that guy's playing, man. Whoever it is.
Uh-huh.
And I read the name Jerome Richardson, and I knew I'd
Yeah.
heard it before, but
Yeah.
that left a very lasting impression on me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got to meet him, that was the first time I met him when we came up there to record with you. And he was just such a great guy.
Yeah.
Was so, you know, it's very nice to know that your heroes are nice people.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. You know, I hope I never read a book about like Cannonball Adderley that says he wasn't nice.
Oh man,
'Cause
he was a great
He was a
man.
nice guy.
He was
I don't
a
want
great
anybody
guy.
saying anything different.
At the end of his life, he came. I went to Southern University,
Uh-huh.
and Kid Jordan was our professor there, and he got Cannonball to come over to do a clinic with us. Man, it was just boy. It's like the real Cannonball
Yeah.
is here, man.
Yeah.
And the maturity that was coming out of that alto was just like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, he was a little heavy, and you know and he had a big beard at that point.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, and but I mean, when it was unmistakable, he might not look like what you remember Cannonball to look
Right.
like, but when that alto started, it was definitely Cannonball.
Mm-hmm.
Man. Oh my God! And he was such a great guy.
Uh-huh.
I mean, just like I just played this set with Clark Terry, man.
Yeah.
And it was so encouraging. I'd play a lick, and Clark would be like, "Yeah, man."
Yeah.
I mean, this is actually, I mean, you know, this is just not just somebody sitting in the front row there. This is Clark Terry,
Yeah.
you know, egging you,
Yeah.
egging you on and just kind of supporting you and stuff. And I leaned over to him and I said, look, if you hear any of your licks, I'm sorry, okay? And he got a kick out of that.
You know, when I don't know how you put it into words, but you hear those, like he was playing some riffs.
Yeah.
It was the set before his first set he played, and Harry Allen would pick him up. But these riffs he came up with were so uniquely him.
Oh, were they?
And like they would take this little turn like, gee, if I had thought of that, I would not have been able to think of that cool little way he ended that
Yeah,
thing, you
yeah.
know. And it's just the years, I guess it's the years and his personality
Yeah, it's
or
just
something.
him. I mean, he just, what comes out of his horn is purely Clark Terry.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's nobody, and I mean, there are very few people in history like that. I mean,
Yeah.
purely, I mean, when you hear Sweets Edison, there's no doubt. I mean, you know, Charlie Shavers and him played a little bit alike,
Mm-hmm.
but when you actually hear Sweets Edison, there's no doubt who it is. I mean, there's no, you know it's coming, and you're still so pleased when it happens.
Yeah.
And that's the way it was with Clark, because he'd have some licks going on, and just the way he would end it was so, you know. And it just leaves you hanging like, you know, and boy, like, man, I hope that happens for me one day, that I could just do that like that.
Right. Right.
I mean, it's easy to follow in some ways,
Mhm.
but to create it is
Yeah.
another story.
You have any unhappiness with the way jazz is being marketed or annotated or being recorded historically these days? Anything
Well,
currently going on that's worrisome to you?
yeah, it's we don't have the blues anymore, Monk. The blues is not an element of jazz anymore. That's why I say the heart is going out of it, you know? 'Cause the blues comes from the heart. And we got all these guys, they got all the licks. You know, they can play licks and make your head swim. But, you know, that blues element, because, you know, I mean, it's the blues is in some ways like a slower way of living. You know, I mean, it's like, it's a dude's way, man. But we got it, everybody, you know, has the publicist, and if you're 19 and you got a great publicist and you can play a few pentatonic scales, guess what, man? You're liable to be a star, man.
Yeah,
and some guy that's paid some dues and has been playing and working and traveling and doing all his stuff and paying the dues. But if you're 45, man, it's probably not going to happen for you, you know? And that's a really horrible thought when I think about it, because it's just, I don't think you really start to play until, you know, like young Freddie Hubbard played all kinds of stuff, man, but a little later, man. Just, you know, he just really started to, like when he did, like, he was pretty young still when he did like Body and Soul and that. But man, did he just play. He had paid some dues. He'd been like with what's the trombone player, the left-handed guy?
Not Curtis Fuller.
No. I'm going to think of it, because Bill Fielder was telling me about that he and Freddie were in Slide Hampton.
Oh, Slide Hampton.
They were in Slide Hampton's band together. And he said, man, Freddie was about 18, man, just blowing all kinds of stuff, man. But when he got around 24, 25 years old, he really came into his own and just was young enough with the energy to do what he wanted to do, and had a few years under his belt that he could, you know, be a little more predictable, bluesy, and with a little more heart. And man,
if you had to make a short list of trumpet players that every aspiring student should listen to and really listen to,
sure.
Who would they be?
My first thing is, whenever someone comes to me and says they want to study jazz, they want to try to play jazz trumpet, first thing I tell them, go out and buy Clifford Brown with strings, and I'm going to give you a free lesson. That's always my...
No kidding.
That's always my deal. Because Clifford Brown displayed on that CD, record, tape, whatever you have of it, how to play melody. Every song on there is a ballad. And Neil Hefti wrote some unbelievable string parts on there. And Clifford Brown just played the trumpet the way it's supposed to be played. I mean, his breathing, his accents, and just he knew when to swell a note or when to be really quiet. And, you know, like when he did Embraceable You, just the first note on there, ba. I mean, it's just the way he played that note is, you're like, hold up. I mean, you have to listen to it, you know, I mean, plenty of people say, oh yeah, well, okay, but you're not listening if you think of it like that. It's just that attack on that first note, that note is that big, man. It's just like, he didn't sneak up on that sucker, man. He just, poof. And I would think some of that early 60s Miles Davis, just about anything, Miles, Seven Steps to Heaven, Milestones, all of that stuff, because that's when Miles was playing, man. He really was redefining jazz, and you know, that modal thing was just working into him. He, because he had influenced musicians that he then hired, and then they kind of influenced him. You know how that kind of went, and he, I mean, quite naturally, any Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker record, boy, because those guys like grooving high, the arrangements, you know, and then when you can, you know, that it was so defining of, hey man, something is really about to happen here, man. You know, and it's just kind of like prelude to to bebop. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just like, you know, and in some ways the introduction was more complex than the tune itself. You know, like some of those, like on Salt Peanuts, you're not going into
Yeah.
that was, man, that's some bad stuff, man. You know, and it's like, but still there's an element of the blues there, man. The blues is just, you know, just waving at you the whole while, man. You know, and a lot of the contemporary music, I mean, the blues is just like hiding in the corner somewhere. You know, guys will bend a note every now and then, but it just seems like they're physically bending it, not emotionally bending it. You know, and that's, I don't know what that's from. I don't know where it went.
Yeah.
But we got people who will claim that they're really playing the blues, and if that's written somewhere, you know, the pen is more powerful than the voice or the sword or anything else. So if it's written somewhere, this guy must be doing it. And
yeah.
you know.
Do you think that some of the younger generation got to the point where they felt the blues was denigrating to their
That's a good
own
question.
culture?
That's a very good question. It could be, but you know what my dad used to say to me? There's a reason for everything, but there's no excuse for anything. So don't make that your excuse not to learn the blues, man. Because the blues is something real, and it's got a real place in jazz. So, I mean, you can say, hey, man, that's degrading, or, you know, it's Uncle Tom or whatever. I mean, it's just, don't use the excuse because of that. That's why I don't play the blues.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, when you think of Louis Armstrong himself, man, the dues that that guy paid, that no one had to pay after him. Every jazz musician is standing on Louis Armstrong's shoulders, man. Everyone. I mean, he didn't have too many. I mean, he had Joe Oliver as a mentor. He had a few guys, B.A. Roth, that he heard play, and but he pretty much single-handedly revolutionized jazz and just did the whole thing, man. Everything after him was affected by him.
Yeah.
He and like Michelangelo, to me, are two of the greatest artists. I mean, the world just was not the same after these guys. And I mean, this is before mass media.
Yeah.
You know? Oh, man. Louis Armstrong, I mean, to be a black man, and I'm not talking about a Creole man that could get by in the brown side of town. This was a black guy, man, with very little education. Came from, his mother was in Black Storyville, and had a, didn't know exactly how she made a living.
Yep.
Had a questionable way of making a living, let's say. And to become Louis Armstrong, that doesn't happen every day.
No.
It's never going to happen again, as a matter of fact.
Not every century.
No. And, you know, so, I mean, if the blues was good enough for Louis Armstrong, man, and good enough for Charlie Parker, and good enough for Roy Eldridge, and Coleman Hawkins, and, you know, Prez, and all of these cats, all the way through Miles, Clifford Brown, Diz, and then the thing kind of all of a sudden, it started to diminish when we could justify that we really wanted to get serious or whatever, you know, and I think blues is serious, man. It's very serious.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's something from within, not something acquired. It's a statement from within.
Well, I'm sure you're going to keep it alive in your own playing.
Oh, man, I just, I like playing, you know, attempting to play some more modern forms and stuff like that, but whenever I think of the way I like to play, it's a very, very strong blues element in there.
What's in the near future for you?
Hopefully I'm going to start doing a little more travel on my own. I've got a little agent that I'm working with, and he's trying to book me some stuff, and where I'm not so boxed in with the preservation whole concept. I mean, it's a great thing to be part of, and but I just have other statements that I want to make.
Yep.
And, you know, the emotion of the seeds. So,
Great.
yeah. Thank you, man.
Well, it's been a great pleasure.
Thank you, Mark.
And I'm sure we'll cross paths
Thank you.
again soon.
All right.